think.
Okay.
So you can't force me to take sides.
But what's your opinion on this two sides? You think it's both right?
Well, it's pretty clear that we are in a situation which is very uncomfortable for Germans and for Europeans because, to some extent, we agree with a description of the challenges that we face in our economic relationship with China, that we currently see in Washington, which is about, the lack of reciprocity, issues of intellectual property, technology transfers, let's say market distortions, competition policy issues, reform progress in China. So there's a lot of, similarities in our perception of what's happening in China between Washington, Berlin, and Brussels. In that regard, I think it's pretty clear, notwithstanding the whole security issue, but even in the economic side of things, we tend to think alike with, let's say, the rational people in Washington, which are not necessarily the people in power. Which means, as you see already, some of the measures that Washington has taken, such as the Section 301 proceeding and other issues, we follow Washington's lead. So are also we're part of this licensing case, for instance, the U.S. started in the WTO framework.
Yes.
And we have a very strong alignment between business communities in the U.S. and in Europe, all complaining heavily of the lack of market access in the Chinese marketplace, formal and informal, discrimination and hurdles and issues like that. So I think, in that regard, fundamentally, there's a lot of agreement between Washington, both Berlin, Brussels, both on the politics and on the business side of things. So that's the starting point. But, of course, no one in Berlin and Brussels appreciates what the Trump administration is doing in global trade. No one is appreciating that they're hitting Europeans with steel and aluminum sanctions. They're not liking the undermining of the WTO system, of the Apple Party. We're not appreciative of the mode of how things are being negotiated or basically enforced. So the whole trade war approach doesn't suit how we tend to handle things. I can also tell you that a lot of people are surprised by what kind of effects it already had. So, the opening in the car market or the promises with regard to negative list reductions by the end of July, if I remember correctly, all of this is an outcome of U.S. pressure. And the Germans will most likely benefit the most from that. So even if we don't like the approach, we come to realize that a tough stance on these issues obviously has some impact.
Yes.
But in general, I think it's pretty clear, and Merkel in your visit just recently to Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang, and others, and Shenzhen and Beijing, made clear, you have concerns. They're about reciprocity, they're about the cyber security law, they're about local protectionism and other issues. And we are very explicit about that.
Yes.
But we're not in a full agreement with Washington on the means that they are taking to shape things in China.
Yes.
That was a very long answer where you basically expected me to say we're in one camp.
Yeah, it's a complex one. So many people criticize American negotiation strategy, I think, because it cannot even align opinion in the White House, and it looks quite, complex.
Yes. Erratic.
Yes. So, but do you think EU face a similar problem because you have 28 member states, and may not agree on the attitude of, towards China? So, how will you solve this maybe dilemma? Do you think it's a problem?
Well, of course, it's a problem that we are very used to.
Yeah.
It's a challenge for all policy matters. That's not specifically about China that we need to find alignment. And in trade, of course, it's been particularly difficult in the past. But, I find it remarkable, honestly, the degree of unity that we had on certain critical questions in terms of our China policy in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So you've probably followed closely, but we had a decision on the market economy status in the European context,
yes,
where no one had expected that we'd be able to come up with a position on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a position that led to a major change in European regulation of our anti-dumping regulation,
mm-hmm.
which is highly unusual. It's not nothing that we do usually, right? So,
mm-hmm.
and that happened on relatively, with a quite substantial speed. So what I'm honestly impressed by is the degree of unity that we achieved in the European context on China policy in the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that's maybe because my baseline expectation was so low.
Yeah.
But it's obvious, of course, that there are certain, not only certain, but there are a lot of differences in terms of approaches in China policy. And one of the big questions will, of course, be whether we manage to set up this investment screening framework in the European context in the next months.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm relatively, again, optimistic about it. I think it's a small step. It's not nothing major, but it's basically something where we still seem to have quite a substantial degree of shared interests.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you think the screening is only a small step, right?
In terms of the practicality, honestly, yes.
Okay.
I mean, we shouldn't overestimate. It's very easy to, it's not a US CFIUS.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, fragmented framework that, you can interpret a lot of things into that. But on the ground, I'm not sure how much this will actually change. Yes, there are certain standards and, like peace in coordination, and the European Commission will have more powers to do certain things, and the member states will, if it goes through eventually. I mean, that's the big debate. You've probably seen the draft.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which article it is, but you now have, and as part of the definition of critical or strategic technologies, you now have the automotive industry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not confident that these things will stay in the proposal.
Uh-huh.
So we shouldn't, judge the eventual screening mechanism by what we now have in the European Parliament's proposal. Mm-hmm. This will change quite fundamentally again. Mm-hmm. So we now have the most critical version that we could get, and it's going to be weakened and softened down again in the next months.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So if this is a small step, would that be like big step or not?
Excuse me?
I mean, if it's, screening of the investment is a small step, would that be any big step, towards China's investment? Or actually, this is maybe what we could get so far the best for European Union?
I have a bit of difficulty in understanding you. I think it's because of the connection. So you were asking me about the potential of a potential big step?
Yeah, I mean that you see that screening of this investment, you see it's a small step. I mean, if there may be the tougher legislation in other aspects or not?
So what I would say, maybe I don't want to be misunderstood on this. I think it's in terms of the complications and what this means, so it's a complicated step, and it's not easy to do that in European context.
Mm-hmm.
What I was trying to say is that it's not going to change our relationship with China fundamentally.
Okay, understand.
This is not, it's not about executive order competencies of the U.S. president to block technology investments. Yeah. This is a totally different level. It's not about screening venture capital in California. It's this is a very limited strengthening, which is a major achievement for Europeans.
Yes,
I think, but it's not. It shouldn't be overestimated in terms of its effects.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So when America now, because the U.S.-China relationship is kind of souring, did you see a trend that this capital, this investment, is transferring from the United States to Europe? Is there this trend?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Very clear.
Very clear. From when? From this year? Early
well, look at semiconductors.
Uh-huh.
There's basically no Chinese investment in the semiconductors industry has been possible over the course of the last years. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these shifted to the UK and Europe in So I think it's pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. So, and
I mean, that's one clear example. I wouldn't say this is a general trend across all industries, but there is this trend for some industries, yes.
Mm-hmm. And in your report, you mentioned about there's a rise in the venture capital investment in Europe, like less than 10% share. So yes, will this be concerned in your maybe the future legislation? Would that be restricted or not? Or screened?
I don't see it currently. I don't see currently that we will have restrictions on that. First of all, the European context is highly unlikely because the European Commission, I don't see them as having the competency to engage in that because of they have competency for FDI but not for portfolio and other capital flows. So that's a different thing. Where do we see venture capital and minority shares? Mainly in the UK and France and Germany. It's not true in Italy. It's also pretty present.
Yes.
So these countries. So I mean, in most cases, I mean, the big question is to what extent will this impact or be a factor in emerging technologies?
Yes.
In most cases, I don't see the German government using a new screening mechanism or something to also tackle with these issues. If they're really concerned about certain aspects of it and these, they might just intervene behind the doors if they need to.
Yes.
But I don't see a legal change in the near future that would cut that.
Yes. Okay. So in April, we noticed that 27 EU ambassadors have filed a report criticizing OBOR initiative. Yes. So how should we understand this report? Does it reflect official stance or not?
Sorry, how can we understand? Is this the official stance or?
You know the report filed by the 27.
Yes, I know the report.
Yes. How should we understand this report? Because it's official or non-official, and does that mean that you don't like OBOR or not?
Well, I mean, what's important to understand, that's the internal thing, right? I mean, it's a joint report by ambassadors that goes back to Brussels, which is not meant to be publicized.
Yes.
And of course, they seek to agree on certain issues. It's a routine procedure in a sense. They do that regularly on certain topics. So it's not too, in terms of the process, it's not totally outrageous. Of course, it's been surprising for some observers that countries like Poland or Greece or the Czech Republic that have been criticized as being becoming too close to China, and obviously also agreed on the critical substance of this report. But to me, it's not that surprising. I mean, first of all, there's a long tradition of member states to hide behind Brussels if necessary. I mean, it's very easy. You can always say, well, look, I mean, it's Brussels. They do the bad stuff, and then they do the good stuff when they talk to the Chinese directly, bilaterally. Now it's been leaked, so it's not very effective as a strategy anymore. But anyway, and the other factor is there's a lot of disappointment also from the Polish and the Czech Republic side about certain developments, the lack of investment, promises. Well, so the promise fatigue. 16+1 not delivering. In the tech case, you have the CEFC scandal, where, as you know, we have a Chinese advisor to the tech president who has been persecuted for corruption in China. This really doesn't help in terms of making Chinese engagement very attractive currently.
Yes.
And then if you have a consistent pattern of even Theresa May not signing the MOU on the Belt and Road. I mean, in that situation, specific British situation where they're very in favor of engaging the Chinese on everything, even she's not signing. Macron is not signing the MOU, so that the Chinese side did not actually even table the MOU with the Germans now with their last visit. So that, I mean, it's clear that also other European countries understand, that there must be a problem. And it's, the context, of course, of that is that we come up with our own connectivity strategy, probably in fall. So this is the context. So we try to come up with our own perspective on that, rather than simply following the logic of a relatively hollow Belt and Road narrative that, in many regards, simply is not in line with our foreign policy priorities, and that, of course, includes mainly three things. I think one is, if you sign that MOU, you sign that you will not criticize Chinese core interests in the future. And that, from a foreign policy perspective, is just it's outrageous. We're always allowed to criticize anything. At least that's what Europeans think.
Yes.
A very European perspective, I guess. The second point is the standards with regard to procurement and transparency, and the impact of project infrastructure projects on local communities. That's something where we have a huge debate with the Chinese side about.
Yes.
And then, of course, it's about the chances for participation of European companies in Belt and Road projects. So for all of these factors, I think we increasingly have a negative perception on the European side, and that explains our reaction.
Yes, you're so sleepy. Yeah, and but Hungary is exception, right? In this. Hello.
Yes, I'm still there.
Yes, I mean Hungary is an exception, right? Besides these 27
correct.
countries. Yes, did you benefit a lot, or?
No.
They're different attitude, yes.
I mean, if you talk to Hungarian and China experts, they're all disappointed. There's, of course, a political clique and a lead that thinks that they might benefit from the railway project or other, I don't know what, what goes into their pockets, or, but again, that's a really intra-European thing also. So Viktor Orban uses every opportunity that he has to make clear that he sees things differently from Brussels and Berlin and other places. So the Chinese are just one other opportunity that is suitable for him. And he, he's been quite vocal on that. I mean, he really appreciates the Chinese model of development and other things like that, and that's great. But I think he also uses this as leverage, internally. I don't know how much conviction is really behind it. But I would not underestimate, and I cannot really assess this, that of course, I mean, he or his personal clique, or certainly leads that are affiliated with him, will or expect or hope benefit from certain Chinese engagement in their country, and they seem to be willing to make compromises or offer a lot to the Chinese side. In fact, I mean, they have signed this MOU as other European countries have, and if the Chinese side defines the Belt and Road Initiative the core interest of them, and you're not allowed to criticize this, Hungarians are just following the rule, the law of that MOU, if you want. But I think that's, I honestly not convinced that this is really so much about China. It's much more about intra-European tensions.
Yes, I understand. So the EU-China summit will be held in July, and because we haven't had the joint declaration for 2 years, so will this year continue without this joint declaration, do you think?
It's very hard to say, because there's, these negotiation dynamics. Everyone starts with the assumption and the willingness to have a joint declaration. That's pretty clear, and I think the efforts are behind the scenes are being made that this is going to be something. Also, I mean, we have the German-Chinese government consultations before that. They also want to have a joint declaration. But then, you never know how this goes. Last year, when we had the issue of the market economy status and the climate issue, there's a lot of dynamics that go on between, MOFCOM officials and Li Keqiang, and who has to say, and, I don't know how they get out of this currently. I don't see us having really big tensions as last year. So last year we had the South China Sea Arbitration Tribunal case. We had market economy status question. So there's